what makes Reya unique is because that liquidity is embedded into the network layer, instead of like a generalizable L2 where all these different DEXs get deployed and the liquidity gets fragmented. Actually, as a DEX goes live, they're actually plugging into this giant liquidity pool and they do not fragment that liquidity. So what that means is, obviously as a new DEX team, you get instant access to this pooled liquidity, which obviously provides deeper markets, improves trading conditions. But then alongside that, as you actually build liquidity for your own DEX, it's contributing to this giant pool as well. So it's benefiting everybody else in the ecosystem.
Welcome to the Edge Podcast. I'm DeFi Dad here with Nomadic from 4RC. Today's show spotlights Reya Network and Reya Perps DEX. In this episode, we talk about how Reya Network is building a trading-optimized modular L2 with instant liquidity, lightning-fast transactions, superior APYs, and a margin account at the network level. But before we do, just a quick word from our sponsors who make the Edge Podcast possible.
Introducing the MANTLE Liquid Staking Protocol, MANTLE LSP, a permissionless, non-custodial ETH liquid staking protocol deployed on Ethereum L1 and governed by MANTLE. With MANTLE LSP, users can stake ETH to instantly receive METH, earn yield and accumulate rewards the longer you stake. METH is the value accumulating receipt token that will give you access to expanded yield opportunities. Stake and watch your yield grow with MANTLE LSP.
Power up your portfolio by borrowing, lending, and multiplying your favorite assets, made safe and easy by the industry-leading automation tools at SUMMER.FI. SUMMER.FI offers a curated DeFi experience to access the highest quality protocols and strategies. Discover new earn strategies for your portfolio in a user-friendly app designed to filter based on the tokens you hold, the networks you transact on, the protocols you trust, and the highest available yields. Learn more today at SUMMER.FI, the best place to borrow and earn in DeFi. Introducing Flat Money, the first decentralized, delta-neutral flat coin built on Base with sustainable yield that's completely untethered from legacy finance. Because DeFi needs an uncensorable based unit of currency. You can mint unit with RETH, which is held in the protocol's shared liquidity pool, where it's borrowed by leveraged traders. As a leveraged trader, you can deposit your margin collateral and go long on RETH. If you're trading in the perpetual futures market, you'll pay unit holders to open leverage positions. If you're holding unit, you'll earn yield from liquidations, borrow rate, and trading fees. Preserve your purchasing power and offset your exposure to crypto market volatility. Learn more at flat.money.
It all started so simply with CryptoKitties and Maker on Ethereum, but quickly became complex with more applications and many chains. Today, everyone agrees UX issues are the biggest blocker standing in the way of crypto adoption. Introducing Avocado. Multi-chain UX redesigned from the ground up. The first wallet to abstract networks, accounts, and gas. One gas tank to pay transaction fees on all chains in USDC. And native access to INSTADAPP's powerful, custom DeFi strategies. Avocado, one wallet to rule all chains.
All right, let's introduce the founder of Reya Labs, Simon Jones. Simon, welcome to the Edge Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here.
Simon, let's go ahead and get started with just a little bit more about your background. So maybe you could tell us about what else have you worked on in the crypto space, and then we can lead into, of course, like why Reya Network.
Yeah, there's it always sounds a little bit crazy to say this, but would you believe it? This is actually my fourth startup. So first two more traditional kind of Web 2 fintech businesses. Honestly, the first one was unsuccessful, but I just learned a ton as a person and, as a founder. Second one was a lot more successful. We actually went on to sell that to an international bank. And it was at that point in time that I'd been staying super close to the crypto space for a while. But the sale coincided perfectly with DeFi Summer. So I then felt like it was the right time to come in, set up a project called Vaults Protocol, which for anyone that doesn't know that was the world's first interest rate swap DEX. We grew that to over 30 billion of volume inside 12 months. So if you know your DEXs, those numbers are pretty good going. And what's kind of crazy is we actually, at the back end of last year, made a decision to sunset vaults in order to focus on Reya, because Reya is 1,000 times bigger idea, which I'm obviously excited to talk through.
Let's get right into it then, Simon. I think in talking offline with you, what interests me is just this differentiation between Reya the network and Reya the exchange. Maybe that's a good starting point. Maybe just break those two down.
Yeah, so it's something which is actually very unique in terms of strategy, but also very deliberate. And there's that we have two products, which is just, for most people, it's weird, right? But the main product is Reya Network, where that is a trading optimized L2, where it's trading optimized predominantly on like two dimensions. So the first is performance, where we actually achieve 100 millisecond block times and over 30,000 transactions per second. So if you compare that to the likes of Say or Monad, which are granted at L1s and L2s, those guys, I think, do kind of 16,000 and 10,000 TPS respectively. So on that dimension alone, we're 2 to 3 times more performant. But then the second main dimension that makes Reya Network trading optimized is the fact that we have figured out how to embed liquidity into the network itself. And frankly, this makes the whole network completely unique. And at a practical level, the way that that works is that users can stake capital. That stake capital gets passed through a passive LP pool and gets made available as liquidity to any DEX that's building on the network. And what is both super cool and what makes Reya unique is because that liquidity is embedded into the network layer, instead of like a generalizable L2 where all these different DEXs get deployed and the liquidity gets fragmented. Actually, as a DEX goes live, they're actually plugging into this giant liquidity pool and they do not fragment that liquidity. So what that means is, obviously, as a new DEX team, you get instant access to this pooled liquidity, which obviously provides deeper markets, improves trading conditions. But then alongside that, as you actually build liquidity for your own DEX, it's contributing to this giant pool as well. So it's benefiting everybody else in the ecosystem. And what we have done, to kind of come back to the kind of original question of Reya Network versus Reya DEX, what we've done is we've very, very deliberately deployed the first DEX onto the network, which is Reya Perps DEX. And that's been done to essentially help bootstrap the whole ecosystem. So the network went live about 6 weeks ago. I can kind of talk to some of the growth. It's been busy and pretty fun like period of time. And then the DEX only went live 2 weeks ago. And there's been a huge amount of volume going through the DEX so far. But actually what we're just as excited about is all of the other DEX teams that we've either announced or are actively working on getting live at the moment, and we will announce pretty soon, which really kind of differentiate the network as a whole, because all of these DEXs will plug into that same shared liquidity pool.
Simon, let's just dig into this like idea of embedded liquidity a bit more. Curious just what types of assets users are depositing in the network. And then just this idea of this like shared liquidity. I don't know that I've seen it done on a network for a DEX before. I think that's pretty novel and new. Sounds like it'll create like quite a positive sum environment. Curious to see kind of how this works out, like if there's going to be competition between these DEXs. Just dive into that a little bit deeper for us.
Yeah, sure. So on the network staking side, the way in which that works today is that users simply deposit USDC, which actually gets wrapped into RUSD. So RUSD is a stablecoin that is native to the kind of Reya Network ecosystem. As of today, it's just wrapped USDC. In the future, it will consist of kind of multiple assets that create that kind of stablecoin. But to stake, as of today, you basically just deposit USDC that gets wrapped into RUSD and then gets passed through this kind of passive LP pool mechanism design that we actually have in the network itself. And at the point that it gets passed through that, that essentially creates this giant liquidity pool that other DEXs can come in and build their own DEXs on top of. And what's quite unique in terms of the way that it works is, as a user, you actually end up effectively with a margin account at the network level, which is really unique. And what that means is it means that you can actually trade across multiple DEXs at any given point in time from a single margin account. And the reason I'm bringing that up is what that enables us to do is it enables us to collect fees at the network level. A proportion of those fees go to network stakers, which is the incentive essentially to stake. And then a proportion of those fees obviously go to the network treasury, but also go back as rebates to the DEX, which is bringing in the volume. So there's this kind of very natural and deliberate incentive structure that exists across the whole kind of network that encourages and rewards DEXs that bring a lot of volume.
So cool. I think that the change up in the design here is what's so interesting to us, because we're used to seeing protocols really just looking out for themselves. There's always been a sort of like shared vision for the network that everyone sits on. Like people are passionate, builders are passionate about like optimism, and they're passionate about Ethereum, and they're passionate about Solana. But I think this design like really does like unite all those incentives. The one thing I'm wondering though is, because of the fact that there's those like shared incentives, or like you're socializing the wins and the losses, I guess here across the network, I would imagine like you have to have specific types of builders or applications that are going to build on Reya Network. You might have someone who's gunning to be more of like the ultimate like dominant DEX player, and they might not be as attracted then to this Reya design. So maybe you could share a bit about like who is building or what's coming, or just whatever you can share.
Yeah, so so it's just worth kind of reiterating, I guess, that the network is actually live. It has been live for 6 weeks, and we launched that with what we described as a liquidity generation event, where actually the amount of capital that came in meant that I think within 4 days there was more liquidity in Reya Network than there was in GMX for ETH, BTC, and Sol market. So it's just huge growth from that perspective. But to answer your question from the DEX side, so if I kind of zoom back out, like what is the problem that we're trying to solve? It's essentially around the fact that I don't believe generalizable L2s are going to help facilitate the next wave of scaling for DeFi. And the reason I don't believe that is because by nature of being generalizable and trying to cater to everybody, you actually create a whole load of limitations for specific use cases. So what that kind of means at a more practical level is, obviously, there's massive liquidity fragmentation that exists on kind of generalizable L2s. But then alongside that, you end up with these kind of like smaller limitations, such as the way in which transactions get executed, where clearly people can front run, which is not good from a trading perspective. Also, gas, just as a general point, is kind of like a terrible variable to add into kind of any form of trading infrastructure. And what we have done is we basically said, well, because we're not going to be generalizable, because we're going to be focused on a specific use case, which is trading, how can we build the best possible network for that single use case? And what that has enabled us to do is it's enabled us to remove a whole bunch of limitations that exist on generalizable L2s. So a good example is we execute transactions on what's described as a FIFO basis, a first in, first out. Basically means you can't front run. Alongside that, we created this relayer architecture that DEXs can plug into that allows you to remove gas as a variable when you're trading. But then more importantly, alongside all of that is this kind of shared liquidity layer. And the point that's worth saying there is the number one reason why DEXs fail is not because they can't figure out the technical side. Like actually, in the whole space, we're all pretty good at the technical stuff. The number one reason DEXs failed is actually because they can't build the liquidity. So what we have created is we've actually created this structure which is positive sum, which doesn't fragment liquidity, and it enables a lot of these teams to basically migrate onto Reya Network, knowing they get instant access to what are deeper markets than GMX for ETH, BTC, and Sol. And that's led to what's quite nice is this, with basically zero kind of outbound outreach, it's led to a huge inflow of teams that have reached out to us and are looking to go live in, some in the coming weeks and then some more in the coming months.
One thing you just mentioned about gas, can you just reiterate, we as users are not paying gas here? And if that's the case also, can you talk about like how that's possible? Just would love to expand on that.
Yeah, so Reya Network as a whole, it still has a gas token, which is ETH. And if a DEX does not plug into the Reya layer architecture that we've created, then a user still will be required to pay gas. What we've added in is we've created this essentially layer on top of the network, which is just a relayer architecture. And on top of that, we've built Reya DEX, but other DEXs can plug into that too. And the impact of that for the user is that gas effectively gets subsidized by the fees that the DEX generates. So as a user, you don't have to pay gas.
Simon, just speaking of some of these other DEXs or players that are building that you're aware of, I don't know how much you can share, but curious if they're like sort of like app specific. Like, are they, is there going to be like an RWA DEX, or are there kind of like niche varieties that you're seeing? Just kind of anything that you can kind of speak of to the, what this is going to look like, the types of people building on the network.
Yeah, so I think there's broadly three different types of DEXs. There's one which I guess some people wouldn't describe as a DEX, which is a DEX aggregator. As a bucket of users, there's a couple which fall into that that are looking to get live. Honestly, one of them we've already announced. There's probably two others which are going to get announced in the coming month. The second bucket of users are just more traditional perp DEXs. So one of those is kind of, without giving it away, it's a top 5 perp DEX that's looking to get live. We'll kind of give that away at the point that it's ready to be announced. Then the third group of users are spot DEXs. And actually, one of the ones which is highly likely to go live in the coming weeks is actually one of the leading spot DEXs across the whole ecosystem. And they're looking to obviously go live and start contributing to the ecosystem and the shared liquidity kind of that exists throughout Reya Network.
I kind of want to just get your general opinion on like the future of on-chain versus off-chain, like where you think we are in that movement, that shift. Whether you think it's like inevitable that on-chain is just better and it will win. I mean, I think I know the answer, but I want to hear you speak to that.
I guess you know where what I'm going to say already. It's funny. There's the permissionless last year. I just remember kind of talking at that event and talking about how at that point in time, saying within the next 12 to 18 months, I think we're going to hit this inflection point where what you can build on chain at first hits feature parity with what you can build off chain, but then very quickly surpasses it because you get all of the benefits associated with in particular the composability that can exist within an on-chain ecosystem. And I guess if you kind of really zoom out in terms of our strategy, we've created Reya Network. That's obviously the main product, shared liquidity layer, lots of DEXs can build on top of it. But then alongside that, we do have Reya DEX. And if Reya DEX were to become kind of as big as we want it to become, what that actually sort of starts to look like through one lens is you kind of have a new breed of exchange with like this open architecture on the back end, which lots of people can plug into and kind of innovate on top of. And fundamentally, that in my mind is just completely transformational relative to what you can do off chain. You just, and you can see it in terms of Coinbase and Base. I think Kraken have announced they want to do their own L2. OKX have obviously got their own L2. We're coming at it very much from the other side. But what you can build on chain and what you can create on chain is just orders of magnitude more innovative versus what exists off chain. And from a trading perspective, we are starting to get to feature parity, and then we're going to start to surpass it because we have this open architecture that exists on the back end.
Just real quick one on that. I'm curious just like how permissionless this whole thing would be for somebody that sees the value prop of Reya Network and is like, I want to go build something there. Can they just get started? Do they need to like reach out? Like what does that process look like right now?
It's completely permissionless. So like all the docs are public, the network itself, people could just, people could go, the truth is they could do whatever they want on Reya Network. The real utility of the network is obviously on the trading side because of the performance with the 100 millisecond block times, 30,000 transactions per second, but also with the fact that they can plug into the liquidity. And a lot of the DEXs obviously do reach out because they want just to kind of bounce questions off us on how they can actually integrate. But the docs are all live, and someone could, if they want to, they could completely self-serve and go live, and we'd only find out after they went live.
Catch the tide of the mainnet launch of Puffer Finance. Whether you're an Ethereum staker or an aspiring node operator, Puffer delivers the decentralization revolution with its cutting-edge technology. Start with just 2 ETH to unlock the potential of native liquid restaking and maximize your earnings. Join the movement now and anchor your stake at Puffer.fi. I'd love to talk about the kinds of users that you're targeting early on, and maybe that's a good lead-in then into the bootstrapping incentives program. I think like what you guys just alluded to with like a future where like a Kraken and a Coinbase, Coinbase has an L2 now, but when Kraken and others eventually launch some L2, there will be this like line in the sand of like, when do you just move to an existing L2 versus launch your own? And I think the answer is there's a race right now to build, a community of users where there's lots of liquidity, lots of yield, diverse, rich types of applications. And if you can get there, then in the future, like it'll make a hell of a lot of sense for, all of these new entities to want to get on board with Reya Network and other networks. So how do you start to bootstrap that growth? And maybe, again, you can talk to us about the bootstrapping incentives program.
Yeah, so again, I kind of come back to, like, for us, I mean, anybody can launch an L2 these days. Like, the actual process of launching an L2 is not particularly complicated, I've got to be honest. Actually building an L2 that has some sort of differentiation and a reason for people to go and build on it, that's the hard thing. And obviously, from our perspective, what we are very deliberately focused on is the liquidity. So we launched the network with what we described as a liquidity generation event. People could come in, they could stake capital into the network, and very much be kind of like early supporters of the whole project. And just to labor that point a little bit, one of the things which is so nice about that from a opportunity perspective is, if you think about any other form of L2, in order for you to be an early user on the L2, you kind of have to wait for the dApps to go live and then go play with the dApps. Whereas with Reya Network, because you can actually do something with the network itself, which is contribute to the liquidity layer, you can actually just get involved into the whole ecosystem at a much earlier stage. So we obviously did that liquidity generation event. That created a ton of liquidity in a very short period of time, which enabled us to then launch Reya DEX. But it is that which is obviously sucking in a lot of the builders at the moment as well. And kind of, we always talked about there's 3 phases to our growth at the beginning, kind of at the beginning of this year, which is that we're first going to have the network go live, the second going to have Reya DEX go live, and then third we're going to have the ecosystem start to be built out. And we're very much in that kind of like third stage at the moment, where we've just announced the first DEX, which is going to go live, but we're also in the process of lining up a bunch of announcements, which I think are going to start to roll out in kind of June and July.
Simon, as it relates to the bootstrapping program, can you remind us or clarify for us what is XP, and then how do we actually earn XP?
Yeah, so XP is it's like our version of points. We just don't want to call it points because it's boring as hell. It stands for DeFi experience, and you earn DeFi experience by being a network staker. And there's a bunch of quite cool mechanisms that we built on top of that that you can play around with to earn boosts on the speed at which your XP accrues. Or, of course, you can accrue XP by being a trader. And there's obviously quite a rich ecosystem of people operating on both of those sides. The third thing which I'd add into that, which is kind of like the time dimension, is that we have deliberately broken stuff down into seasons. So at the end of this first season, which is season OG, there'll be essentially like a snapshot of the amount of XP that you have. There's also a snapshot of the rank that you have, because you can earn ranks as you accrue XP each week. And then, yeah, obviously that will be used in different ways in the future is probably all I can say at this point in time.
Simon, something I'm always thinking about, when I'm talking to builders like yourself, is how do you pull this off from, I guess, a regulatory compliance standpoint? It just seems like it's gotten so much harder for builders until recently. We're starting to see some light, but yeah, like, how do you approach building something like this in this like extremely rigid regulatory environment?
Yes, I'm going to be honest, it's hard at times. There's if I kind of answer that question in a slightly different way, there's one of the things which I completely skipped in my own personal introduction is I was never even meant to have anything to do with finance, let alone crypto. I actually got into university to go study architecture, and long story short, I had a few life experiences in 2008. The global financial crisis, obviously a long time ago, but looking back on that, it completely changed the direction of my life, because instead of going to study architecture, I went and studied economics and came out the other side to do what is now 4 different either fintech or DeFi businesses. First 2 were regulated. They're just more traditional Web 2 businesses. So dealing with regulation is something that I was kind of fine with. With DeFi, it's just hard. You are inherently global on day one. The US regulatory regime is obviously pretty hostile, is probably the best way of describing it, and that's quite difficult. And frankly, I think the vast majority of founders in this space would actually just appreciate some sort of clarity more than anything. It's a lot easier to operate within an environment that actually has rules versus an environment that just deliberately has ambiguity to make it kind of complicated to know what to do. That said, of course, like obviously the network itself is going to be decentralized. It's permissionless. People can kind of go in and do whatever they want on the network. And from a ethos perspective, for me personally, right, like I changed the path in my life in order to create products that can positively improve the financial system and frankly change the lives of billions of people. So we want the network to be decentralized. It will be. People can go in and build on top of that. In the meantime, there's a ton of crap we've got to try and navigate. That's the reality.
Are there any other bits of infrastructure or maybe like examples of innovations coming in the space that you're excited about as it will impact, let's say, the future of Reya Network and Reya Perps DEX?
I think one of the pieces which is going to be just interesting to see how it evolves is a lot of the interoperability infrastructure. Because we are going to have thousands of L2s. And I think there's kind of, obviously there's going to be, some of those that kind of don't go anywhere. That's just always the way. I think at one end of the spectrum, you're going to have some of the larger projects which just have a very application-specific network. It doesn't support anybody else. It just supports them. In the middle, I think you're going to have projects like us where we're very deliberately focused on a specific use case and can aggregate in a lot of the teams that are building for that use case. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there probably will continue to be space for generalizable L2s, Personally, I just don't think that that's going to continue to facilitate the next wave of scaling. But how that all ends up being connected is just going to be an interesting space to watch. Personally, I think actually it's likely to be facilitated by a kind of ZK technology. It's not there yet. I think it's, having played around with it, I think it's probably about 12 months out. And the significant point there is just ZK proofs are obviously recursive in nature, which means you could aggregate a lot of stuff into a single proof. Whether that's the only solution, let's see. There's obviously lots of people doing lots of different things. Layer Zero's one of those. Socket, who's a team that we partner with, doing some pretty interesting stuff on that side. Intent-based infrastructure is quite interesting. So there's a lot of stuff, and it's just going to be interesting to see how that all evolves.
Teller is a decentralized protocol that enables anyone to borrow or lend using any Ethereum asset. You can think of a Teller loan as a DeFi cash advance, one where you can use any of your favorite ERC20 tokens as collateral to get an instant USDC loan. Discover the power of a DeFi cash advance today at teller.org.
DeFi enables a whole new world of trading and yield opportunities. Sometimes we all wish we had a little bit bigger of a budget so we can make the most out of it. That's why we created Blueberry. Blueberry lets you access the best opportunities on Ethereum all in one easy-to-use terminal. You can access 5x, 10x, or even 20x your money in one click, more than any other lending market, so you can maximize your earnings. Only on Blueberry.
I feel like we gave a lot of airtime to Reya the network, but just looking at the Reya Perps DEX as well, I see two markets that are tradable as of today. It's BTC and ETH. Just kind of curious, like, when will more trading markets open up? Can you tell us maybe what you're thinking through for new asset types, new trading pairs, and any, I guess, issues with, I guess, Oracle feeds or anything like that? Like, yeah, just kind of generally curious about the rollout of new trading markets.
Yeah, so there's kind of, obviously we spend a lot of time talking about Reya Network because it's the main product in terms of what we're building. But Reya DEX is still extremely important in helping bootstrap the whole ecosystem. That obviously has to be rolled out in like a smart and sensible way. So we've deliberately started at the beginning just with two markets, which is ETH and BTC. They're both settled in RUSD. And then we've got a single kind of collateral asset, which is USDC, which then gets wrapped and turned into RUSD. Clearly, there's kind of bare bones, right? Like there's going to be multiple new markets that get rolled out in the coming weeks. Particularly now that we've done about 170 million of volume inside 14 days. So there's kind of confidence really in the kind of the system and that everything is working as intended. So we'll start rolling out new markets, and then alongside that, we'll start rolling out new collateral assets as well, which will actually include yield-bearing collateral assets. So there could be any form of kind of like staked ETH. There's obviously multiple assets which will kind of roll out on that side. There'll be some kind of yield-bearing stable coins as well, which will get rolled out. But obviously all of that contributes to just having a better kind of trading experience for anybody that's operating on the DEX.
Also, little Easter egg in there, yield-bearing stablecoins. If you call Athena stablecoin, I bet that's coming in the future.
One last question before we start to wrap up. So when I think about like what you're building, you know, there's obvious like peers or competitors, let's call them, among the different Ethereum L2s. But then there's considering the fact that there's just so many different communities that are flourishing right now, especially in a bull run. Communities of traders, like let's say on like a Solana, or let's say like a specific protocol like Hyperliquid, or let's think about upcoming L1s like Monad has a lot of attention. I recognize they've been able to build a very strong community for not actually being live. How do you think about drawing the attention of on-chain traders to Reya? Like, is that the focus to go after the traders that are already out there on-chain, or do you have growth plans for just attracting like net new traders on-chain, like trying to convert folks who are maybe on centralized exchanges or have never traded crypto, period?
Yeah, so I think it's a mixture of all of the above, to be honest. I always think about it in terms of like circles, concentric circles that are getting increasingly large. And obviously the majority of people who are interacting either on Reya Network or Reya DEX as of today, they're super DeFi like native. Almost certainly interact on lots of different perp dexes already, have come in keen to contribute and kind of test out the new product, create liquidity, support the project from a very, very early stage. You know, we've already got a pretty active Discord of like well over 30,000 kind of people. And there's various different kind of groups that have already started to emerge within that of kind of like VIP traders as an example. That's obviously the starting point, but actually what we want to do is we want to help bring in a lot of the users which exist outside of that kind of very DeFi native ecosystem, which I think to begin with is a lot of the CeFi traders, help them move on chain, which is a combination of reaching feature parity and also, frankly, allowing them to do things that they can't do on a CeFi venue, like interact with a rich ecosystem of dexes. And then after that, yeah, like we want to get everybody on chain. So there is an increasingly large circle that exists outside of that as well.
Yeah, it's exciting to think about. I think the concentric circles you described, like those will keep getting larger. Like right now, there is a challenge of, again, fighting for the attention of who's already here. And there's no doubt you have to establish roots with a community that can stick with you and continue to be loyal and kind of like support a network while it's still nascent. But like long term, obviously part of the reason you're here, Simon, why Nomadic and I are here is we've seen how much the crypto space as a whole has grown. And I think we're all like very, very confident that it will grow by many multiples in the coming years. I mean, we're not even at a point where we can say that there's trillions transacting on chain, and that will come very, very soon. Well, Simon, this is a good place for us, I think, to start to like close the conversation. So I want to remind our listeners that they should first learn more about Reya by going to Reya.network. They should also check out the Reya Perps DEX that we talked through at Reya.xyz. They should learn more or follow the account at Reya_XYZ on Twitter. And then be sure to follow Simon's personal account at 0x Simon Jones. All of that's in our show notes, so you can easily reference it. Simon, thank you so much for coming on. Congrats on the launch. Again, like the numbers are really impressive, just given how new you still are. I'm sure those will continue to grow. Can you give us any final word though on like how can we get involved with Reya, or any other cool thing coming that you can tease us with that we can look forward to?
Yeah, so there's like I said, there's kind of already a very active community within Discord. So whether you're a builder in the space, whether you just want to contribute, whether you want to get involved as a network staker, I kind of encourage you to come into the Discord. There's a small army of community mods at this point, which will be happy to help with any questions that you have. And then alongside that, the launch of all the dexes, which is going to start taking place over the coming months, is probably one of the most exciting parts to start being involved in.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you're a talented founder or developer, please consider reaching out to our team at fourthrevolution.capital. And for future episodes of the Edge podcast, please check out our link tree at edge_pod.